Good morning, everyone. I've been asked to speak to you this morning about some verses from Proverbs as part of the series that we're in at the moment. And the verses that I've been given are in Proverbs 5 and Proverbs 7, but I'm going to focus on Proverbs 5. And they're essentially about marriage. And actually about faithfulness in marriage and about investing in your marriage so that it lasts a lifetime. I've got some experience in this area, given that I am married and I've been married to Crispin for 17 years, but I'm aware that that's actually nothing compared to others. And we still have so much to learn as a couple. So to prepare for this talk, I've done some talking to other couples who've been married longer than us, one couple for 67 years. And also couples who are at different life stages of us, people connected to this church who have so much wisdom to share after many years together. Now, I've really learned a lot from this wisdom and I've threaded their ideas into this talk, so I can't take credit for it all myself. Of course, there'll be lots of you listening to this talk who are not married. You may have been married in the past, but are not now, or you may be single. But I do think this is important for everybody, no matter what your life situation. Why do I say that? Well, because marriage demonstrates spiritual truth, to start with. It provides an image of Christ and the church. Ephesians 5 verse 31-32 says, "A man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church." So good marriages that last a lifetime illustrate something amazing about God's unending love for us as believers, as the church, and as believers as individuals as well. He bears with us through our ups and downs, and he's faithful to us through his patient, enduring love. And his passion for us doesn't run dry. He loves us. So the book in the Bible called Song of Songs or Song of Solomon says, "My lover is mine and I am his." And that's speaking of that love between Christ and us, as well as the love between married couples. So we belong to Christ and he belongs to us. And in that relationship with him, we can be completely vulnerable, completely known, and he will remain with us. So marriage is great because it just tells us something about this incredible love relationship between us and Christ. Also, Hebrews 15 verse 4 says, marriage should be honoured by all. So not just those who are married, but by everybody. So I think that marriage is an important institution in the family of God. It gives the body structure. It makes way for families. And good marriages also provide safe places for people to gather around. Now, I think here of that passage about oaks of righteousness, that image of a large, mature tree that provides shade and shelter and places for people to gather around. Good marriages should be that in the body of believers. So marriages are vitally important and they must be invested in by the whole body of Christ. So please listen up, whichever life stage you're in. And now I'm going to read those verses from Proverbs 5 that I'm going to focus my talk around. So turn with me to those verses. I'm going to read the whole chapter. It says, "My son, pay attention to my wisdom, listen well to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion and your lips may preserve knowledge. For the lips of an adulteress drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave. She gives no thought to the way of life. Her paths are crooked, but she knows it not. Now then, my sons, listen to me. Do not turn aside from what I say. Keep to a path far from her. Do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your best strength to others and your years to one who is cruel. Let strangers feast on your wealth, and your toil enrich another man's house. At the end of your life you will groan, when your flesh and body are spent. You will say, how I hated discipline, how my heart spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers or listen to my instructors. I've come to the brink of utter ruin in the midst of the whole assembly. Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your streams of water in public squares, let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. A loving doe, a graceful deer, may her breast satisfy you always. May you ever be captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? For a man's ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all his paths. The evil deeds of wicked man ensnare him. The cords of his sin hold him fast. He will die for lack of discipline, led astray by his own great folly. So, quite a full-on chapter, and I think quite specifically a strong warning against marital unfaithfulness. Adultery is dangerous, and it's a path that leads to hurt, damage, and broken relationships. These things might seem like a good idea at the time, but this chapter warns that it really is a path of destruction. But faithful marriage, on the other hand, brings life. Verse 18 says, "May your fountain be blessed, and may you rejoice in the wife of your youth." The images in these verses about running water and fountains imply freshness, joy, and delight, not something that's stagnant or boring, and something that's private, something that's for your own personal delight as a couple. They speak about a marriage whose joy doesn't run out, but lasts a lifetime. But those of us who've been married, or anyone who knows anything about any kinds of relationships actually, knows that things don't always feel like that, and that this quality of relationship isn't an automatic thing. It takes investment and it takes work. And this is where I've been chatting to different people who are married and picking up kind of thoughts and ideas and looking at the Word of God as well, and have a few just thoughts about what are the ingredients of a successful marriage that lasts a lifetime. Well, first of all, a good place to start, I think, is that all of this is based on an understanding of the sanctity of marriage. Marriage was intended and created by God and is a gift to us. Genesis 1 verse 31 says, "God created male and female, and it was very good." Now note that in those verses, the creation of light and land and sea were only good, but the creation of man and woman, male and female, was very good. And in chapter 2, verse 24 in Genesis, we see how man and woman became one flesh. Now that speaks of sexual union, but also about a man and a woman looking to each other to meet their every need. Chapter 2, verse 25 also says they were naked and had no shame. So they were completely vulnerable before each other. They were completely known by each other. And this was, note, before the commandment to have children. So it's not just about procreation, but this was God's intention. So having that in our minds is really important, that being married is a privilege and it's something sacred that we are to hold, something that we are to hold not in a light way, but to know how important it is. My next point is, clearly these verses are speaking about the physical side of marriage, and that physical side of marriage is really important. And the Bible speaks very clearly about how that should be kept alive. God made sex for our pleasure. So if you have any doubt about that at all, then read the book of the Song of Solomon and you'll be convinced. Our physical relationship is important, and it will change throughout the seasons of life, but it must be kept alive. 1 Corinthians 7 verses 3-5 says, "The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to the husband. Do not deprive each other except by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer." So the intention here is that married couples keep satisfying each other, and that this aspect of the relationship is not neglected. In neglecting that side of the marriage is left vulnerable. But there's also something really important about that side of relationship that keeps our love and our connection alive. Just in a biological sense, physical touch causes our bodies to produce the hormone oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone that makes us feel close to somebody. So there's science about that being an important part of our marriage connection. Now, there may be seasons in life where physical intimacy fades for a time, like having children or being under a lot of stress at work or wherever else, aging, health problems, but adapting and finding a way to express physical intimacy with each other remains important. And I think these verses in Proverbs 5 are really clear about that. So Don't give up, find a way through. Another point, which is a similar point, I think, related, is we need to change and adapt in our marriages so that we can grow through life seasons. In a recent film starring Tommy Lee Jones and Meryl Streep, which is about rekindling love in marriage, the therapist Steve Carell asks the husband, "What does marriage mean to you?" And this is the beginning of the film where they're both very dejected and distant from each other. The husband's answer is, "It means we have a marriage license and I pay all the bills." And when the wife is asked a similar question, she says, "You know how you think you're always heading towards something. You think when we get married or when we have kids or when the kids go and it's just us again. There's always something to look forward to. And one day I realised that we're not going towards anything anymore." In this film, the couple then go on a really intense journey. They have marriage counselling and we watch them on that journey, and they discover each other again in their later years. And they realise that these were just mindsets that they fell into that harmed their marriage. And on the other side, we see them entering into a new, joyful phase of their marriage journey together in their later years. And it strikes me that this is what we need to do. We need to steer clear of stagnant waters in our marriages, whatever age we are, and look for new places to go. And that may be precipitated by new life seasons or just a change in attitude, but things don't have to stay the same. Running water and fountains that we read about in chapter 5 of Proverbs suggest something fresh that changes over time. And I think to enable that to happen, we need to have a sense of agency over our marriages and over our lives, a sense of control, that we can do things differently, and to know that things can be as we want them to be. A book that I've been reading from in recent years, which is actually currently propping up my computer, I've realised, but I'm going to pull it out and find the right page, is a book called Present Over Perfect, something that's really spoken to me over the last couple of years and I keep going back to. I might have even mentioned it before in a talk at TBC. This isn't speaking so much about marriage, but I don't know, I think this is really important on this topic of making love and marriage last a lifetime. It says this: "What's changing everything for me is a new understanding that we get to decide how we want to live. We get to shape our days and our weeks, and if we don't, they'll get shaped by the wide catch-all of normal and typical, and who wants that? You can live on a farm or out of a backpack. You can work from your kitchen or in a high-rise. You can worship in your living room or a cathedral. Isn't that beautiful and exciting and so full of freedom? You can wear slippers or heels, eat steak or kale, read poetry or spreadsheets, fall asleep to the hum of the city or out under the stars. You get to make your life. In fact, you have to. And not only can you make it, you can remake it. So many of the people I admire most have lived several lives. My favourite college professor spent a couple of decades in a beach town and now lives a positively city life. My friends Tish and Kale and their 3 kids just travelled around the world for a year. Blaine, an actor and a maker who's lived like a gypsy for years, just bought a house in our neighbourhood with his wife Margaret and their darling girls Ruby and Eloise. And this long-time wanderer is growing herbs and lettuces, driving down routes, literally and otherwise. We get to decide, which is both so freeing and such a beautiful responsibility. You can be a vegan. You can be a priest, you can homeschool, you can train for a triathlon, you can live in the city, you can read the classics, you can buy all your clothes from a vintage shop, you can buy a Vespa, you can learn to speak Farsi or Italian. This life you're building is entirely your creation, fashioned out of your dreams and fears. What do you want? What do you love? What ways of living have you simply acquiesced to because someone told you to? Because it seems smart or practical or easy? Are those the best words to describe how you want to live? I find that really inspiring, and I suggest those of you who are married, or those of you who are single, in fact, reflect on some of that and think about where you are in your life now and think, well, what do I want in this season? So much of the time, what we want and what's burning in our hearts is there because God put it there. So let's not just get used to the stagnant in our lives and in our marriages, but let's think about what do we want our marriages to look like now, in this season, And what do we want? I think that will make for an interesting conversation between those of you who are married as couples. Another point is to be united spiritually. God's intention is that we are equally yoked, which means that we're joined with others who are believers. This is true in marriage. One couple that I spoke to as I prepared this talk said, a shared faith in Jesus brings a third person into our relationship, which further unites us. And another couple said, keeping individual relationship with God healthy and agreeing what works for us as a couple in sharing prayer and Bible study is important. It's quite easy to both be individual Christians around each other, but we know that there's power when we come together. Where two or more are gathered in my name, I will be there, God says. Jesus also gives strength to marriages. When he's included, a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. I'll talk a bit later about how that works in a marriage when there's only one believer and the other person is not a believer. But those of you who are believers together, don't take that for granted. It's a gift from God. It's an incredible thing. And find those places where you can merge and encourage each other spiritually and in a proactive way. Another point is about working through our differences. So I have a little story to share here. So over the summer, Jake took us kayaking at Minadon as a family. It was really good fun. Crispin and I shared a kayak, and for the first 10 minutes, we were all over the place, and we just couldn't get going. It was like he was going one way, I was going the other. I blamed him, he blamed me. We quarrelled, and we just did not fit together at all. We kind of laughed, but also got a bit annoyed with each other, just as we were working out how to kayak together. And it looked and it felt like we would never get anywhere, and it was kind of embarrassing. But then something happened. Out of our differences and our kind of quarrelling slightly, we sort of worked out what we both needed to do to complement the other one. And at a certain point, things just clicked and we powered off. And actually, we made quite the high-speed kayaking team. And that just sprung to my mind as I was thinking about this. And I was just kind of feel led to kind of encourage you that it is quite normal to have differences. And maybe this speaks to those people who are at the sort of beginning end of their marriage. I would actually suggest that rubbing up against each other the wrong way and quarrelling is not only normal, but healthy. Because this is how we find out how we are different from each other and then how we can work together and complement. So it's kind of through that we get our click. Which is why I think sometimes people say the first year or two of marriage can be a little bit bumpy, because that's the working out that you've got to do before you do find your click. Together, we are stronger, but there's often a bit of jostling to work that out before we have that joint power. But our conflict should be healthy. Ephesians 4 verses 26 to 27 says, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." Arguing isn't fun, and being angry with each other isn't fun, and it needs to be resolved. So let us be people that know how to resolve our differences in marriage and to get to the other side of that. One couple I was talking to in prep for this said, "We have learnt to agree to differ. However, it is important to settle difficulties before going to sleep." A simple point, but an important one. But I like that. We've learned to agree to differ. We're not trying to be the same person in marriage, and we wouldn't want to be because we wouldn't get that compliment. So we have to agree to allow the other person to be different to us. For years, it drove me absolutely mad that Crispin can find nothing in our house. And actually, he doesn't even look for something before he asks me. But you know what? At some point over the years, I've thought, well, actually, it's a nice way for me to be useful. He's different to me. He can't find anything, but thank goodness I can. And we complement. So we have learned to agree to differ is an important point. Another couple I spoke to said, there will be quarrels. We don't stop being individuals, and a misunderstanding is not the end of marriage. Another small point is having a sense of humour. Fortunately, I think Crispin is really funny, but I have noticed that when he cracks a joke, I'm often the only person in the room laughing, so I'm not sure how funny he actually is, but fortunately, I find him really funny. And for this, it's one of the most important glues in our marriage relationship. We can make fun of each other, we can laugh at ourselves, and we can laugh at each other. And for us, I think when that disappears, it's a little sign that we need to spend more time together and to invest back in our marriage again. It's perhaps a good temperature test. I don't know if anyone else can relate to that. Another point that I gathered from the people I spoke to and from my marriage is time together. Now, this sounds really obvious, but it's easily missed depending on your life stage. And when I say time together, I do mean sharing interests, but actually I'm really speaking to the most powerful time together, which is when you're actually talking to each other, ideally looking at each other as well. So when did you last have a real heart-to-heart with your marriage partner? I don't know if anyone else can relate to this, but even just a short time of that fills my soul deeply. It feels like home. And then I guess my last point in this part is about avoiding temptation. So really, when we look at Proverbs 5 and Proverbs 7, it's speaking directly to avoiding temptation in the form of adultery. And just a word on this, really, that I think this starts in the thought life. It never just happens out of nowhere. And a point that somebody made to me in prep for this is that there are never two completely innocent parties when this kind of thing happens. Verse 8 says, "Keep to a path far from her," i.e. far from adultery. Steer well clear. So we're not to skirt near temptation and see what we can get away with, but we're to steer well clear. And like I said, that starts in the thought life, and that really is where it needs to stop. So a very powerful way to get hold of that kind of temptation once it's happening in the thought life is at that point to confess it. To your partner, to someone else, ideally both, to confess it, because that brings things into the light and it breaks the power of darkness and temptation and sin. And if things have maybe gone a bit further than that, then definitely it's time to confess. Bring others alongside you, because it's in those times when we're weak and we cannot stand alone. So the warning is clear, but what we do about that as married couples is to know that we're all fallible and to steer clear, well clear from that path, from that temptation, and nip things in the bud before they get anywhere. And you know, when those things are happening in marriage and the thoughts are going in other places, I also think that's a really important temperature check to say, things may not be well at home where they need to be, and to reinvest back in the marriage and to give it some attention again. Before I go, I just want to say a few things to those for whom this might bring up stuff. So if you're not married, 1 Corinthians 7 verse 32 is very clear that singleness is a gift from God. You know, there's a real power in being a single person, in that you have all of your life, all of your time to devote to the Lord. And we can follow Paul's example in that. And he speaks of that being the highest calling. But if you think that it is right for you to marry, then just a quick word saying, just be really wise in who you do marry. 1 Corinthians 6 verse 14 says, "Do not be yoked unbelievers." Part of the intimacy of marriage is sharing that spiritual relationship. And you have a choice right now as to who you join yourself with. And I would just suggest that you do make that choice carefully and make sure that it's somebody who you will want to be married to for an entire lifetime. Also, to say to those who are not married, who can you gather around in terms of good, strong marriages within the family of God? And also, how can you support marriages? And even to those of you who've been married to it for a very long time, is there something that you can do to bless younger married couples? Can you provide a place of accountability and support to those in early marriage or those who are struggling in marriage? We all need to support and help each other. If you're the only believer in your marriage, then hang in there. The Bible talks about how it's powerful still. Just by being there, you bring God into the marriage. And you, by being there, help to sanctify your marriage and your marriage partner. God is that powerful. And your prayers for your partner and your godliness are a powerful witness. So don't give up. Keep up your faith. God does hear you, and draw others alongside you to pray with you. Now, if you're struggling in marriage, I just want to say that God wants to be with you in that. He knows how hard it is, and he understands how difficult it can be to keep strong in your faith when things are tough day in and day out. Difficult things don't always change quickly, but God wants you to keep bringing your marriage to him in prayer, and he wants you to have faith that things can change for the better. Reach out to others for support, and don't be alone in the struggle, and make sure you take wise counsel for the specific situation that you're in. And for those who've struggled with marriage breakdown or who've been hurt by adultery, you may have found this morning's talk difficult. And I just want to say, we live in a fallen world. You're not defined by your marriage breakdown. You may have been rejected, but God will never reject you. Be kind to yourself. Don't be afraid to seek help, but seek God first. Express your deepest feelings to him. There are no right or wrong answers for every situation, but God will show you the way for you and for your path, your plan for your life. Forgiveness is important and it can happen in time, but it isn't dependent on someone saying sorry. And when you allow God to heal you by his grace, he will take you to your next season in life that can lead to really good things. And if you yourself have fallen into adultery, God's forgiveness extends to you. You're not beyond his salvation, and you're not beyond restoration. There is still hope, though work might need to be done and difficult choices might need to be made. Again, bring others alongside you, get wise counsel. And at the end of all of that, I just want to leave you with some thoughts that I managed to gather from the very dear and wonderful John and Margaret Hart, who used to be part of Town Baptist Church for many years, and they've now moved away. They've been married for 67 years. So these are the first people I went to ask their thoughts about what makes a successful marriage last a lifetime. And I loved what he said, and I just wanted to share that with you as I close. He says, "I have an oft-used saying, keep on keeping on. Ideally, we started married life as committed Christians, which of course really helps. We were hard up, but with a strong respect and regard for each other. Arguments are plenty, but the mutual resolving of these taught each other's way of thinking, which is necessary. I love classical music," this is John now. "Margaret has no interest, but tolerated the primitive hi-fi, but now earphones are the answer. There's always a way. It's called give and take. Sharing responsibilities is a must. After the birth of our son, my aunt visited and was appalled to see me changing and bathing him. Aiming to maintain that first love for each other is another priority. It is, after all, the basis on which the union was founded. So, demonstrative love, respect, mutual resolution of problems, tolerance, none of us are perfect, and determination are among my ideals for successful marriage." Thank you to everyone who helped me to put this talk together, and I hope that some of it landed with you this morning, whatever your situation is. And I do want to say, if you would like to talk any more about any of the issues that were raised in today's talk, then please reach out to your pastoral care worker, to Pete, to James, or to me. I'd be happy to talk to you as well. God bless you. Bye for now.